Welcome to Reasons for Believing, the first in a series of 5, examining the very strong evidence undergirding the Christian faith. I hope you come with an open mind, hope you come ready to think for yourself and not just accept what everyone around you seems to think. Hope you come ready to challenge me with your own thoughts and ideas on these very important subjects. The enemies of faith seem to think that it's okay to trash Christianity as a fantasy for gullible morons. So I think it's time to redress the balance. I wish my fellow Christians would be a bit more forthcoming in making our case, but we all seem to have swallowed the view that it's somehow too offensive to assert that Christianity might actually be true. Consequently, we censor ourselves and make everyone think that we accept their view of us. However, people have very reasonable grounds for believing. So we're going to do 5 because there's so much ground to cover. Even then we won't have covered it all, but I hope we'll give some gist for it. I'm going to start with the classical proofs for the existence of God. These were codified by someone called Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. If you want to know more, there's a good, if rather complicated, discussion of Aquinas' thoughts on Wikipedia. Just look him up there. These 5 ways that he spoke of have been under a lot of fire from angry secularists for some time. And there is actually some justification for the faults that they allege with some of Aquinas' work. The first fault is actually with the word proof, which is sometimes used of Aquinas' 5 ways. They're clearly not proofs in the current sense that they demonstrate the existence of God as a mathematical certainty. They really invite examination or define a field for debate for me. Thomas Aquinas never called them proofs, he called them ways. I'll call them arguments. I think that's the best way. I'm going to start by weeding out the weakest one. St. Thomas Aquinas has what he calls an argument from degree. It's just not convincing, really. Most of what we experience comes in relative degrees, says Aquinas, say from hotter to cooler, or wetter to drier, or nicer to nastier. So if all these things are relative, there must be some sort of absolute standard to which we're comparing them. And the absolute to which everything else is relative, says Aquinas, is God. However, this doesn't seem quite so obvious to me. First of all, absolutes can be quite hard to establish. It's been established, for example, that there is a temperature called absolute zero, and that's easy to establish because relatively easy in a scientific age, you take absolutely all the energy out of a system, and the temperature it's then at is absolute zero. There's no heat whatsoever. But what's absolute heat? Where's the other end of the spectrum? How hot does it have to be? I'm pretty sure you could create absolute dryness simply by taking all the water molecules out of a test tube, say. But what would absolute wetness be? Well, we could do with a little bit more wetness at the moment, couldn't we? Flying back to England's green and pleasant land from my holiday in Finland was a bit of a shock to see it all so dry and dusty. But absolute wetness. Well, I think, therefore, that we can't use that as an argument to point to God as the absolute to which all these other things are compared. And I don't think it's possible to argue from conceptions, abstract ideas, to actuality in this way. To say that because there must be some absolute to which all standards are relative, therefore there must be a God, seems to imply that just the fact we can think of something makes it real. I don't think so. I can conceive of the perfect banoffee pie. Unfortunately, I've yet to discover it. So it doesn't work for me. And actually, Aquinas himself found the same fault with an earlier proof of the existence of God called the ontological argument. And he said, just because we can form an idea of something doesn't imply its existence. Next on the hit list is Aquinas' fifth way. This is called the teleological argument, and basically it's the argument that the universe exhibits purpose or design. Of all the arguments, it's probably the most controversial today, because obviously for an atheist to accept that the universe is designed means that he's already conceded his position. There must be a designer for there to be design. But the atheist can appeal to several areas to help him. In some areas, the design appears to be perverse. I could ask, why does Finland have so many mosquitoes? For example, spoiling that freshly forested and laked paradise. Why parasitism? Why do animals have to devour other animals just to live? In others, the purpose appears to be incomprehensible. Why billions of unreachable galaxies? Why a million species of beetle? In still others, there seems to be a huge amount of randomness. For example, in what we know today about quantum physics, where it becomes increasingly more difficult to say whether a particle, a very tiny particle, is really there or not. Or, for example, the dark matter, which scientists tell us makes up at least 85% of the universe. And finally, the universe often exhibits processes, things that develop over time, where Aquinas saw purposes. Natural selection, say, or the gradual cooling of the universe after the Big Bang. So I think these problems have lessons for believers as well as for unbelievers. Believers, I think, need to show greater humility in the face of the great mysteries presented by the universe. It would be arrogant to suppose that the purpose of the vast tracts of space is entirely focused on our doings on our little planet, or that we should be able to work out God's unfathomably deep purposes as if they're a Sudoku puzzle. And yes, we do live in a different universe to Aquinas'. Perhaps the galaxies are there as a display of God's infinitely fertile creativity, of his majesty, or of his infinity transposed into a new mode in terms of extremely large numbers. We don't know, but we're just filled with awe at it all. So this argument from design, the teleological argument, for me needs restating. And the statement I would choose is that the universe is intelligible. Somehow it's amenable to the numbers, the words, and the ideas that we humans supposedly evolved totally at random to make sense of our experiences when we move from the forest to the savannah. Amazingly, it seems that the little pathways of electrons moving around in our brains actually do correspond to real things. So there are logical ways to the ways things happen. And without those logical laws, without them, the universe would collapse into chaos. At some level, both we and the universe we are part of are rational. And this is intensely significant for us. It could be the most incredible fluke ever, the result of an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of typewriters describing an infinite number of possible universes over an infinite period of time. And we're the lucky ones who just happen to have got on board the only ship that is sailing. But it doesn't look like that, does it? It looks like it's rational, that it follows these laws, that it doesn't just suddenly explode into something else, that it's consistent in the way that they operate, without which life, of course, will be unintelligible. Of course, it could be looking that way just because there's an infinite number of monkeys, etc., because we've won the golden ticket for the only ship that can navigate the waters of chaos of all possible universes. However, a little piece of logic called Occam's razor comes to our aid here. William of Ockham, who was a medieval Christian monk, held that in formulating explanations, we should avoid the multiplication of entities. And that means that if we have to fabricate a long chain of disconnected ideas to explain something, when there's a simple and direct explanation to hand, then we should prefer the simple and direct explanation. So that's what he's saying. Keep it simple. If you invent lots of stuff to try and make your explanation happen, it's probably not the right explanation. So to me, the multiverse, the infinite number of dysfunctional universes, leaving us as the only one that gets it right, looks exactly like the multiplication of entities. By their very nature, as universes completely outside our own, we can never observe them, we can't experiment on them, there's nothing we can do to test their reality. They are therefore speculations. They have ceased to be science, because science is about the observable, the verifiable, and the repeatable. In fact, they're nothing less than magic. Oh, everything's really caused by all these invisible powers. Not rational at all at the bottom, is it? So in place of all this unnecessary complexity, we should prefer the direct and elegant explanation. The universe looks rational because it is rational. Where came this rational? In fact, this argument, when restated in the form of the universe is intelligible, provides strong grounds for the reasonableness of supposing that there is a rational mind at work in the way the universe is. The intelligibility of the universe tells us that mind comes before matter. And what is the mind that creates something so vast, so beautiful, so awesome, and yet so intelligible as the universe we live in? I have to admit, though, that I felt a bit bad rubbishing the multiverse in the paragraphs above. I actually think that if God is the kind of God who can create billions of galaxies and 1 million species of beetle, it wouldn't be at all unlikely that he might create other universes too. As wise old Professor Kircher says in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, nothing is more probable. What I would expect to find, though, because of the intelligibility of our universe, is that if God did create other universes, and if they ever become amenable to our instruments, that they too would exhibit rationality, beauty, and sufficient orderliness to enable them to continue to exist. That's a very different set of universes to the dysfunctional ones that are trapped in Brian Cox's infinite monkey cage. And that view comes by starting from the view that there is a mind that creates the universe. That's why it's rational, and therefore it's likely that the same mind might create other things. It's a very, very different proposition to the idea that it all arose out of mindlessness, that somehow rationality emerges as a byproduct of the order that we see at work in our universe. Well, the other very intriguing thing to observe about the argument from intelligibility is that it puts a certain boot right back there on the foot on which it belongs. Somehow or other, we have come to swallow the secular position that the more we understand about the universe, the less we need God. This view depends entirely on the belief that people invented gods to give explanations to the unknown, as in, what causes thunderstorms in the sky? It must be the thunder god. However, this is not what any of the great pioneering scientists, the people who invented science and gave it to us, actually thought. Like Copernicus, Newton, Mendel, Faraday, innumerable others, they were mostly believers. Instead of thinking they were invading God's space and therefore squeezing him out, they thought they were finding out about what God had done. Thinking God's thoughts after him was Kepler's phrase. The argument from intelligibility expects that the more we know about the universe, the stronger our grounds for believing in God will be, because we will see more and more that there is mind before matter. And we'll see in the order and beauty of the structures of the universe that we are thinking God's thoughts after him. Well, we've still got 3 more of Aquinas' ways to explore. The first mover, the first cause, the argument from contingency. I don't want these to be quite long. I want them to be reasonably bite-sized. The substantial ground, common ground between those 3, and I'm going to discuss them all together in the next issue of Reasons for Believing. I hope you will agree with me that they provide further and stronger support for the reasonableness of believing in a creator God. However, there is only so far that Thomas Aquinas can take us. If we accept his arguments, we end up with a creator of all, a mind on a supermassive scale, a supreme being, rather like the one painted by William Blake in the illustration that I'm sending out with this issue of Reasons for Believing. But it's not enough. God conceived as a supermind in this way easily becomes an aridly intellectualized being, remote from us, creating the laws that make the universe work, and then abandoning us, remote from us, right out of our league. So when I've finished looking at Aquinas, I aim to move on to a key area for connecting with God, not merely coming up with concepts about him. Blog 3 will be I believe in God because I believe that Jesus is his son. The next blog after that will assert that I believe in God because through him I can see life whole. And this step enables us to move on to the way that we live our own lives in relationship with God, to see God as part of who we are and the way we live. In the last post, I'm going to cover as my 5th reason for believing the inadequacy of all the alternatives, because frankly, when you go into them, they're rubbish and they're not good for us. And this will give us space to reflect on where society is going and what we need as human beings to flourish. It all looks terribly ambitious. I hope I'm up to it. Your comments are welcome. Thanks for watching.